Yeah, I'm very happy to welcome you to our annual webinar. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Eva Oberle, Associate Professor at HELP in the School of Population and Public Health. I lead the MDI at HELP, supported by our amazing, outstanding MDI team and in close collaboration with the school districts. With me today are presenters Kate Bume and Lianne Carley. And Kate is our knowledge broker at HELP, and Lianne is a senior policy analyst who is joining from BCH today. And they will be speaking about supporting action with our data. I'd like to first acknowledge that our land takes place on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. And as an immigrant from Europe, I am especially deeply grateful to live, learn, and work on this land. I recognize that the Musqueam have been the rightful caretakers of this land for time immemorial, and their stewardship and cultural heritage are integral to the history and the future of this region. I'd like to also acknowledge my responsibility to respect and honor the ongoing relationship with the land. And we're very fortunate at HELP to have guidance from the
Ava, we don't see your slides.
Oh, you don't see my slides?
Not yet.
Ah, so sorry. Okay.
No problem.
Let me see here. Okay. The slides were just nice slides, but not, but now we want to have this one. Yeah, I think I forgot to share them. Sorry.
No problem.
Do you see it now?
Yeah.
Thank you, Kate. Thanks. Okay, I'm not going to start from the beginning because you don't need those slides, but I'd like to start here now or continue here. We're very fortunate to have the guidance from the Aboriginal Steering Committee at HELP, which was established in 2003. The ASC is a committee of First Nation, Métis, Inuit community members that ensure that HELP's research activities involving First Nations, Métis, and Inuit are reflective of the diverse histories and cultures and languages and the ways of knowing in BC. So this is a nice, wonderful picture. We just had a meeting last week with the Aboriginal Steering Committee, which is really a wonderful 2 full days to connect and talk about research and Indigenous ways of knowing. Okay, so some very quick housekeeping notes. The webinar is being recorded. Recording will be available afterwards on the HELP YouTube channel. At the bottom of the screen, you will notice a Q&A button and a chat feature. So if you have questions as you listen, you can just type in the question in the Q&A feature. Please do not type it into the chat. We won't be monitoring the chat for questions. We'll do our best to get as many questions as we can and to answer them this early afternoon. So, okay. So many of you have seen this overview slide a few times, but I want to just very briefly introduce the research we do at HELP. For more than 2 decades now, HELP has collected data on children's experiences and development through the Child Development Monitoring System. And the monitoring system consists of 5 questionnaires that gather information on critical periods in child development, and specifically exploring the individual, the family, and community factors from different perspectives at a population level. So we have the toddler development instrument that is completed by caregivers. We have the early development instrument completed by teachers in the kindergarten year. And then we have the middle years development instrument and the youth development instrument. Both of them are completed by students themselves. The MDI in particular is collected in grades 4 to 8 and the YDI in grades 11, 12. And the YDI in particular is an affiliated tool with HELP. It's led by Dr. Hasina Samji, who is at SFU and works with the BC CDC. The questionnaires are all collected in partnership with school districts. So this is really, I want to give a big shout out and thank you to all of you in the school districts who are supporting us and who are supporting children by helping us collect these questionnaires and sharing the data back with you and then using the data in your annual planning. Just a brief overview of what we will be speaking to during this webinar. Okay, so let's jump right in. For those of you newer to the MDI, it is a self-report survey for children in grades 4 to 8. Why grades 4 to 8? It's a transitional time in child development. It's marked by increased risk, but it's also a window of opportunity to make a difference. The MDI is unique in the sense that it reflects the voices of children. So it's an opportunity for us as adults to learn directly from children rather than hearing about children from teachers or from other adults in their lives. Children also feel very empowered when they're confident and their thoughts and opinions and perspectives are heard and listened to. So it's really important for us to take seriously what children share with us through the MDI. We ask children about their lives inside and outside of school so that the information that we collect with the MDI is actually relevant for schools, but also for communities and for families. Here's an overview of the dimensions included in the MDI. We measure different areas of development that are very strongly linked to well-being. It includes social emotional development, school experiences at large, connections with adults, with peers in different social contexts, but we also measure children's activities during their out-of-school time. So really seeing out-of-school time as a general ecological context in children's lives that is important for their developmental trajectories and well-being. And we also measure physical health and well-being. There's been great uptake of the MDI over the past decade. In the most recent year, we had about 35,000 children participating. You'll note that over the years, the participation pattern has changed a little bit. We started out with grades 4 and grade 7 originally. And then over the last few years, we've also provided the opportunity for school districts to participate with grades 5, 6, and 8. So now the more common patterns are participation with grades 5 and 8, but we do also have districts that participate with the younger years, or some of them also participate with all of their grades. Here's just an overview of the districts that participated this year. It's really great for us to see good representation across BC. We have both urban, smaller, and rural communities participating in the MDI, which helps us really understand also some of the differences in children's experiences across these communities of BC. So all of you have received your both individual school reports and district reports over the last few weeks. And we can now look at some of these trends over time with respect to how children are doing in BC and what we saw in the last wave in particular. Some of the data also are really nice now because we have a few years now since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we can really see how did things change with the onset of the pandemic and now a few years afterwards. Okay, let's jump right into the well-being index. I like to repeat this every time just for all of you to have it fresh in your mind of what we really look at when we look at the well-being index. It's an index you see over and over again in HELP's work. It is a composite measure. It combines different indicators of well-being into one overall well-being index. So what you see on the left is the different measures that are included in the index. Positive and negative indicators of well-being. So the negative one would be sadness, and then we reverse it into an absence of sadness and use that as a positive indicator of well-being as well. All of the indicators that you see there, optimism, self-esteem, happiness, and so on, they're very highly interrelated. That's why we decided to combine them in a composite measure to have like a larger reflection of children's well-being. The index has 3 categories of well-being. So children can be in the category of high well-being and thriving, and this indicates the proportion of children who are reporting positive responses on at least 4 out of the 5 measures of well-being, and then medium to high well-being and low well-being. Low well-being would be when the proportion of children reporting negative responses on at least 1 out of the five measures of well-being. So this is the data from this year for all of the 5 grades that participated during last year's data collection. What you can see is that well-being slightly declines from younger to older grades. So in grade 4, 35% of the children were thriving, and by grade 8, only 29% of youth are thriving based on our measures. What I want to point out here is that this developmental change that we see over the years is actually quite common. Here's a graph from a cohort study from almost 700 students in the US. This is a nice study because it followed students from age 9 to age 17. So a longitudinal cohort study, students were asked about their emotion states at each time. The graph that you show here is positive emotionality. And what authors found was that with an increase in age, so over the years, there was an overall decrease in positive emotionality as children were transitioning from middle childhood to adolescence. So overall, it's good to see that we see overall consistent between the decline over the years we see with the MDI from lower to higher grades and what other studies have found. A possible explanation is that as children are facing new tasks, new challenges, they're growing older, they're transitioning to new schools, school is becoming a little bit more difficult maybe, or the responsibilities are becoming larger. Students are slowly moving like maybe more towards their peer group and participation in community. And all of this is also accompanied by an experience of heightened emotionality during the adolescent years when rapid psychosocial changes take place. I think this is an opportunity for us to not necessarily see this as like, oh, this is typical, there's nothing we can do about it, but really emphasizing that there is a need during this time for early intervention and for prevention in order to support emergent youth. And here we go. What we see here is actually the trends over time. So here we're showing you a snapshot of the data we've collected over the past many years so we have different amount of years for different grades. We have 9 years for grades 4 and for grade 7. And then we have 4 years here we're showing for grades 5, 6, and 8. So when we look at the overall, at the bigger picture, the 9 years of data for grades 4 and 7, what does pop out is a decline in thriving levels over the past decade. I think it's very clear to see this pattern. The broader picture is also consistent with what we've seen in other national, international studies, both for self-reported mental well-being data, but also for administrative data. For example, when we look at mental health-related hospital admission rates. I do, however, want to point out here that for most of the grades, the lowest point was about 2 years into the COVID-19 pandemic in 2021, 22. And afterwards, we've now had the 2 most recent years of a slight uptick in well-being trends. So maybe this is a little bit too early to call it a trend, but I think with 2 slightly more positive years in a row, we can definitely be cautiously optimistic. The grade 4s are a bit of an exception here in this graph, and we really still need to keep watching that. We're not sure where they're following a slightly different pattern, so it's even crossing over, but we do also want to recognize that the grade 4s here are a smaller sample size for the last year. So I think overall, I'm quite pleased to see that thriving levels have slightly increased in the past 2 years, and hopefully we will continue to see that trajectory as we're moving also further away from the COVID-19 pandemic. The increases were consistent across the different well-being index measures. So we were first like thinking, okay, let's dig around a little bit. Maybe it's one measure that is kind of pulling this overall uptick in thriving. But what we did see is consistency across the well-being index measures. As you can see here, the gray bar is the most recent year, and that's the highest percentage of kids thriving. I mean, some of you might be thinking, okay, but these are really tiny changes. Yes, but this is a population-based study, population-based data. So we wouldn't be expecting huge jumps in data from year to year. Instead, small but steady differences is what we're looking for in the trends. Let's look at some of these trends in well-being across sex and gender groups. Consistent with SOGI, we added a gender identity question in 2017. So on the MDI, children can indicate if they identify as a boy, girl, in another way, and then they can say how they identify using a text box. Last year, we also actually added non-binary as a separate option because this was the most commonly used option in the text box. So we decided that we can actually pull this out and firmly offer it as an option that children can select when they complete the gender question. The gender identities outside of the binary are more common among older children. I don't show this here in a graph, but this also makes sense because older children are exploring more or have been exploring more and are getting to a point where they're slowly establishing their identities. So what we see here is the percentage of children thriving by sex over time. So the sex variable we use is a variable we receive from the school districts. This data is data that shows us how children are registered regarding their sex at school entry. And for sex, you see a growing and quite large well-being gap between boys and girls. Girls have lower well-being and also a much steeper decline in well-being over the last few years. But also, again, here for boys and girls, you see the slight uptick in the 2 most recent years, which is really great to see that this is also consistent among those 2 subpopulations. Then let's move on from sex to gender. Maybe just like a quick side note here, when you compare the sex and the gender data, what you see is that most of those who are registered as boys also identify as boys on the self-identified gender question. Those who identify in another way or as non-binary are more likely to be those who are registered as girls by the ministry. So let's look at the gender question here on the right side. And what we see is that those who identify in another way outside of the binary overall have much lower well-being across all study waves. So this is consistent with research that has shown that in many societies, gender diverse children are more likely to experience discrimination, stigmatization because of their gender. So this is not something that is about the children themselves, but it's about the context, the social context, and in some cases, a context where children just cannot feel safe and cannot feel they belong, that is associated with a negative mental health and mental well-being outcomes. So gender diverse children and youth in several studies have been shown to be more likely to experience clinical mental health problems as well compared to those who identify as cisgender. So this is really where SOGI in school comes in to support environments of inclusiveness, environments of diversity, and safety for all children. And again, here on a positive note, I want to highlight that we see also among children who identify in other ways, we see a slight increase in this gender diverse group in well-being over the past few years. So one interpretation is that maybe SOGI is now much more firmly integrated into the policies and curriculum at school. It's been a few years now of having SOGI implemented consistently across BC. And I think schools today have found several ways to support and prepare teachers and staff how to talk about gender in a way that celebrate and support diversity. It was a bit hard to find a study that actually I could compare our MDI data to, because there's not much data yet on well-being over time among children identifying as gender diverse. But here I'm showing you a recent study. This is a study currently still under review at the Lancet. So if it is accepted, it might look a little bit different once it comes out. But it's a study conducted in Finland. And I found this was also consistent with our data. They actually did a very similar project where they sampled children every year at a population level and then look at trends over time. And the authors did find recent improvements in mental health among those who identify as gender diverse. And they actually tied this to recent policy changes in Finland that support the rights of people identifying as gender diverse. So it was great to see that we don't only see that on the MDI, but we also see that there's consistency with studies found in different parts of the world. I won't go into the details here because we don't have that much time, but schools play a very large role in supporting gender diversity and ensuring that gender diverse students are heard, feel safe, and feel that they belong. And I just had an opportunity recently to talk to educators and district principals at an event. It was organized by SELBC. I showed some of the findings we have looking at the gender-specific data. looking at other measures, not just the well-being index. And it was really great to hear the examples of how SOGI is implemented now in schools, how it's integrated into the curriculum through code of conduct, professional development, and also student-led clubs and alliances. So that was quite promising. And yeah, we're looking forward to continue to follow this group through the MDI and see how these experiences of children are changing over the years. Let's move on and take a look at the assets that we measure on the MDI. The assets index is a measure of key resources and influences present in children's lives that help promote positive development and well-being. And we have detailed explanations of how the assets are built and what they are composed of in our MDI companion guide and other materials. So feel free to go to the website and check that out. Overall, we have multiple asset categories: supportive adult relationships, positive peer relationships, proper nutrition and sleep, and participation in after-school activities. I'd like to just remind you here briefly that participation in after-school activities is a measure that changed 2 years ago. So the changes that we see in the data over the past few years might also be because of the changes of that measure. We used to ask this question specific to activities in a limited time frame during specific after-school hours and not on weekends. And now the measure is just more inclusive in the sense that we ask children about any of these activities on any day of the week during any time of the week. The assets are very important. On the MDI, research has shown, in many different studies have shown, that increasing number of assets are related to increases in well-being. We also see this on the MDI here. It's almost a linear relationship when you look at it. When assets are present, there's a stepwise increase in well-being with each additional asset. Importantly, and I think that's what I want to highlight here, is that the assets are actionable. So peer belonging, connectedness to school, supportive adults, these are all things that can be supported through intervention and through programs and strategies in a child's life to support their well-being. Yeah, let's look at some of the MDI data on the assets. So what you see here is that overall there's actually been quite a bit of consistency in the assets. Note that with the population level research, as I mentioned, we don't expect huge jumps in these findings from one year to the next. But what we do see is a slight upward development for both adult relationships and peer relationships in the last year. So compared to 2021 in particular, which is 1 year into COVID, that's probably like a 3 percentage points up in children reporting that or scoring on these indicators in a way that they would be considered having the asset. It might be that by now social connections have recovered from the policies we had during the COVID-19 pandemic, which is really great news. And we really hope to continue to see that trend developing in the same direction over the next years. Nutrition and sleep are up and down a little bit. Nutrition in particular is something we are really curious to follow now that we're going towards implementing a national school food program. And hopefully that's what we also will see reflected in the nutrition item, because one of our nutrition questions in particular is about having breakfast and whether or not children have breakfast in the morning. And if these programs offer breakfast at school, that would be one way we would be hoping to be able to capture that in the MDI data. What you see here is for both lower and higher grades, there was consistency in the adult relationships over the past years, except for neighborhood adults. And in neighborhood adults, we really saw, quite a stark drop from pre-COVID to COVID. And now we're really seeing a slow but a steady recovery over the past few years. So this is really great to see. I think, especially this year, I've also noticed that things are like society is more and more opening up. Like activities are on, events are on, street fests are returning. Some of this already happened last year, a little bit the year before, but I think this year is the first year where we can really feel that neighborhoods are, you know, I don't want to say back to normal, but a lot of the events that were gone or that were paused and then were in the meantime, maybe some things needed to figure out before they would bring them back on. These are back on, and I think it's great to see that this is also reflected in children's experiences of their neighborhoods. And the same here, peer connectedness, having a close friend, have slightly increased over the past years. Potentially another reason for why we see these slight increases in thriving over the past couple of years. So good to see that as the assets are growing, we also see that well-being is growing again in children. Overall, we say this over and over again, relationships matter. And I think in particular, spreading the opportunities for building relationship assets across multiple contexts. So really focusing on the peers, but also the adults at school, also adults at home and in the neighborhood, and increasing opportunities for children to connect, to build social networks, also through after-school activities, is actionable and makes a difference for their well-being. Let's move on to children's healthy habits and how these are related to their well-being. Many of you are familiar with the 24-hour movement guidelines. The guidelines offer recommendations for the amount of time in sedentary behaviors, physical activity, and sleep within a 24-hour period. And on the MDI, we measure children's typical bedtime and waking time. So from that, we can get a variable for sleep duration. 9 hours is the recommended sleep duration for this age group. And we ask children on how many days per week they're physically active for at least 1 hour per day. This can add up throughout the day. So that's a second health habit we're measuring that is consistent with the guidelines. And we also are measuring children's time in screen-based activities. For that age group, 2 hours is the recommended minimum time. Most of the children exceed that, but we'll be looking into that in the next few slides. Let's look at screen time first. What we measure is time spent watching TV and videos, time hanging out with friends on the phone and playing video games. And then for the older age group, we also measure time spent on social media. So in grades 4 and 5, 45% reported more than 2 hours of watching stuff like TVs, videos, screening, and so on. So this increased to 53% for the older age group. And then I want to point out here, just because social media is such an important topic, and there's been lots of conversations recently, especially in the media. And social media is the bar that you see on the very right side. We only have this question for the older children, mainly because at the younger ages, legally, they're not supposed to be on social media yet, which doesn't mean that it's not happening yet. But so when we look at that data, 38% report being on social media for up to 2 hours per day, and 37% report more than 2 hours a day. So only 26% of the kids reported that they never use social media for this older age group. We don't show this here, but the kids who report higher levels of screen time in one area were also much more likely to engage in all types of screen time. So it wasn't so much that some kids would be the ones who only play video games or who only hang out with friends online or only on social media, but the more common pattern was that as kids were using it frequently, they were using everything more frequently. And when we connect screen time to well-being, what we see is that for TV and remote socializing, a little bit of usage, just under an hour is actually ideal for well-being. For video games, percent thriving is actually highest when children report spending up to 2 hours of playing video games per day. You might wonder why, and I dug into that a little bit, and there has been research showing. So first of all, the video games boys are overrepresented in the video game category. And there is research that has shown that for boys, socializing often begins with and then also continues to involve playing video games together. And that part of the in-person social networks are built and then also later maintained through the virtual networks in video games. So this is, I mean, especially when we think about boys and the ways they socialize, this is interesting for us to learn, and maybe also to see what are the needs here and what are some ways also boys, but everyone can maybe meet these needs that they meet through gaming in other relationships and also in in-person interactions, in addition to the video games. But even here, we also see that, you know, once the video games exceeds 2 hours per day, there is a very clear decline in well-being. That is quite apparent. So for social media usage, just let's skip to the next slide so that we can break this down a little bit by the grade levels. For the grade 6 and 7s, almost 40% of kids were thriving among those with no social media and social media up to an hour. And then with each additional hour off social media, the percentage of kids thriving declined. In the lowest category, so those who are spending more than 5 hours, only 10 to 15% are thriving. That pattern among the grade 8s is overall similar, but you do see that there's a little bit of an increase in thriving, going from no social media to up to 1 hour of social media per day. And I think, you know, not being a part of social media in grade 8, of course, not being a part of social media can be protective in many ways, in the sense that children are not exposed to potentially harmful content and interactions and experiences. And at the same time, if social media is the norm in the peer group, if this is what everyone is doing and engaging in, it can also mean that children can feel like they're missing out, have difficulties connecting, or they don't belong to these experiences that others are sharing through shared social media experiences. So really something for us to think about as adults, and maybe as we tackle this social media challenge, thinking about how can we also shift norms. The decline in well-being with higher levels of social media usage was much more apparent for girls than for boys. This is also consistent with research done by Jean Twenge. But we also have to note that we see girls overrepresented in the category of children using social media and using it to a very high degree. The question, of course, is what is screen time displacing? And we're back to all types of screen time here. So those with low screen time are overrepresented in the group of children who read daily, and they're underrepresented in the group of children who never read. So screen time, to some extent, replaces reading. Screen time also replaces other activities. When we take a look at this graph here, it's not as pronounced, but similar pattern in the sense that for team sports and for music and arts lessons, so children who do team sports twice or more per week, they're more likely to meet the recommended 2-hour cutoff for screen time, and children who do not do team sports are more likely to spend more than 2 hours daily on screens. But I also want to acknowledge that overall, it seems like that even among highly engaged children who do sports, who do music and arts and other activities, even among those, higher level of screen times are actually quite common. And we've had this challenge that when we look at our data, if you add up all of the screen time categories and all of the hours reported in each of these categories, some of the children are just ending up with this huge amount of screen time hours. And by talking to the children and trying to understand how is that possible, how can you be like 10, 12 hours on your screens every day? It turns out that, of course, lots of children are using multiple devices in a parallel way, being a part of an online conversation while also watching something, and while also maybe having a video game running on the side is actually quite common. So when we talk about screens, we need to talk about sleep as well. And a good night's sleep is critical for mental health and well-being. 54% of the children in grade 6 to 8 do not get enough, 54% got enough sleep, at least 9 hours on a normal day, whereas 46% did not get enough did not get the recommended amount of sleep. With regards to well-being. Children who did not get enough sleep were overrepresented in the category of low well-being, and children who get 9 or more hours of sleep were overrepresented in the category of thriving. So it really links this association between sleep and well-being and highlights the importance of getting enough sleep. And of course, we can always tie this back to sleep screen time and think about what is it that stops children from sleeping. Why are they not getting enough sleep? Well, if you look at screen time in relation to sleep, you see that children with 4 or more hours of screen time are also more likely to go to bed after midnight, while children with 0 to 2 hours of screen time are more likely to get to bed by around 9 p.m. So this is an important link I think we have to pay attention to, and also like think about what is it that families can do, what is it that schools can do in communicating the importance of creating these healthy habits, especially around screen time and sleep. Screen time has really received a lot of media attention in the past months, partly also after the release of Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation. Our director, Mariana Brosoni, contributed to the book and also to Haidt's blog, After Babel. So if you have a chance, feel free to look that up online. And just talking about this need to bring back a play-based childhood for young people, to get them off their screens, but also to allow them to stay in discovery mode in the real world, outside in their real physical lives. All of you working in school districts, of course, you've heard about the lawsuit in Ontario against social media giants. That's been widely covered in the media. And I think all of this is like resulting in some momentum that is there at the moment, momentum and pressure to pay attention to what are the potential harms of social media, understanding the underlying need that draws children to the social media space, and where can we make a difference and shift things to help children, especially those who grew up with screens, to also see a different type of world and a different type of engagement with others. Let's look at some of the other health habits. For the grades 4 and 5, about 30% were meeting the physical activity recommendations. 80% met the sleep recommendation. And when we just pull out the video games here, so because that's the most common one for the younger age group, 60% were within the recommended 2 hours of video game activities. And when we combine these health habits into meeting or not meeting each habit, and then adding them up into checking like how many kids meet 0, 1, 2, or all of them, it's interesting for us to see that in the lower grades, 38% of the kids met all of the recommendations, and 42% met 2 of them. I think this is really good to know. It's important as you see that the percentage of kids thriving increases stepwise with an increase in health habits. So when all health habits are present, that's also where you see the largest percentage of children thriving in that category. So just for us to think about, and rather than focusing on one topic, focusing on the multiple ways we can support children in creating healthy habits, because they are also interrelated. And as you support one, you also support indirectly the other. For grades 6 to 8 students, almost 30% were meeting the physical activity recommendation. 46% got the recommended hour of sleep. And then here, when we use just the social media as a screen-related health habit, 61% were within the recommended amount of time for social media. And the number of older children reporting all health habits is a little bit smaller here, 27%, but roughly we see a same pattern on the right, where the percentage of kids thriving increases stepwise, and the number of kids with low well-being decreased with an increase in the reported health habits. So just thinking about how can we support children to be physically active. Being physically active will also have an effect on how children sleep, and it also means that children spend time being physically active, which is the time they spend not being on their phones. Check out the recent participation report card. It has some strategies as well to support improving the healthy habits of children. And I highly recommend adding this to your toolbox as you work with children. So one last thing I'd like to look at is just a little bit of the spotlight on citizenship and responsibility. And so for our children to grow into confident, socially responsible, and contributing citizens in society, they need to feel empowered. And they need to feel like they have agency. Empowerment is particularly important for youth who are identifying as part of a minority group in society and who experience marginalization. But giving all, and these youth in particular, a voice is an important step towards empowerment. And this is also one of the reasons why we designed the MDI as a self-report tool. And even though this graph overall shows a decline in children feeling empowered and feeling that they can make a difference in the world, I'd like to point out the last couple of years in particular. In the past 2 years, there was stability among girls in feeling that they can make a difference in the world, and a slight increase in boys. So hopefully we see this stability and then positive development here that persists in coming years, especially now that children and youth are recovering from this perceived lack of agency that also many adults experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic. I think it is a time where we can see that slowly there is more optimism and confidence picking up among young people. And I think schools and communities and all of us are an important part of that trend. I highly recommend that you check out the dashboard. The dashboard has new dimensions, new data, new ways of looking at the data. Set aside some time, share the dashboard with your colleagues, with your peers, with others in the field. It is really a great tool to engage with MDI data and also to look at data in a broader sense, like across BC. So here, I would like to pause and ask if there are any questions before I hand it over to Kate and Lianne. Anything you would like us to clarify?
Aoife, I think, why don't we carry on? We've been answering lots of questions in the Q&A. So
okay,
let's do a little show and tell of the dashboard, and we'll save some time at the end for discussion.
Okay, that's great.
Great.
So I'll just hand it over.
Okay, thank you. So fantastic. And I get to be the one that shows the dashboard. I'm hoping that you can see it now. Aoife, can you just confirm you see it? The dashboard?
Yes, I can see it.
Fabulous. Okay, so let's just start my video. Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay. So what I would first like to do is to thank you very much, Aoife, always so interesting. And I want to make a shout out to our E-Systems and Reporting team and DMAT team, because they've done so much great work on the dashboard. So Ryan, Ishmael, Charlene, Paulo, Barb, Jeremy, because I just get to be the Vanna White of this thing that you can play around with on your own time. The other thing I want to say is that this is new and improved, released today. We are expecting that many folks on the call have probably dabbled with the last dashboard. So we're going to skim it and really highlight the new features. But if you want to reach out and have a one-to-one conversation about it, please do. We love to do that. I also just want to remind people that data in the dashboard is aggregated by children's postal codes. So represents children that live in the boundary designated, but let's get into it here. So the first thing you're going to notice, this is the new look and feel of the dashboard, that we have a new landing page, new introductory information that gives a nice grounding about the MDI and some key resources to look through. Some other things, we've done some changes to the navigation panel here. So specifically, we mentioned about boundary types that you can search, so you can look at school district and neighborhood level boundaries. I'm going to stay in school district, but we've added a fuzzy search. So if you want to just start typing and see what you can find, you can go ahead and search that way. There's some changes here to the way, the look and feel of how we've shown what grades of data are available across what years. So nice and clear here about what's available. You'll notice that grade 5, 6, and 8 only have data from 2020, 2021 school year on, and that's because that was the first year when those grades were able to be collected by school districts. And then in our first version of the dashboard, the modules that you could explore were below, but now they are above, so you can check them out this way. And so let's dive in. So for example, we're looking at demographics. Let's go to grade 8 students. So the boundary type we're in is school districts. We're looking at all school districts in BC. We're here in grade 8, and you can see that over 16,500 grade 8 students completed an MDI in this school year. It looks at the languages spoken and the participating districts that were involved in grade 8 data collection this year. So this information was previously available, just highlighting it, reminder. You can look at the well-being and asset indices. So here we're in well-being index. We're still in grade 8. We're looking at all the school districts that participated in this map. The darker the color, the higher the thriving rate, the lower the color, the lower the thriving rate. We're seeing the overall picture across all outcomes on the well-being index. So 25.4% of grade 8s thriving on the MDI this year. And then that range in thriving rates across all participating school districts. So we have a school district as low as 13.5% and as high as 37.7% thriving. And then you can see data over time. And note, there's that little slight increase in the last couple of years that Aoife mentioned in her presentation that we're very hopeful about. So I'm just going to hop into a school district. Let's get a little more granular. So let's look at Sunshine Coast. First thing you notice when you pick a school district, that what grades and years that school district specifically participated in show up. So that's helpful to know. What years did they collect this data? So we can see they collected 5, 6, and 8 this school year. Looking at grade 8s still, we can see that for Sunshine Coast, 26.1% of grade 8s were thriving. And that's a little bit higher than this gray line, which is all participating school district average. And then you can see, where does Sunshine Coast fit in that range of all the participating school districts? So it's on the middle upper end of other school districts in terms of thriving rates. And again, that data over time with that little uptick that we're so happy to see. When you scroll down in this module, so we're in the well-being and asset indices. When you scroll down, you can see the components that Ava mentioned for well-being. And then you can explore each of the 4 asset areas that were also mentioned. So here I'm in adult relationships. So this is showing what percentage of students in Sunshine Coast in grade 8 said that they had this assets of 71.9%. Where do they sit in terms of other school districts reporting on this, and then their data over time. So next thing I'm going to, actually, let's change. I'm going to go to a slightly larger school district. And going back here. So now here we are in Coquitlam. Again, you can see which years did this school district participate. It shows up here nice and clear, so you can click around and switch in between. You can see, again, we're still in grade 8s. We're in this school year that 24.3% of grade 8s were thriving in Coquitlam, where they sit in that range. And what I'm going to draw your attention to up here is the modules. So I want to hop over to Explore Within. So this is the same kind of information that was available before, but now it's a little bit more easy to navigate. But one thing you'll notice is that that's hard map to see. So if you get in this kind of a situation, just use your zoom, zoom, so you can see what you want to see. And what you're noticing here is the thriving rates, so that well-being index. What are the thriving rates across neighborhoods in the school district that you've chosen? In this case, now we're into the neighborhood level data. The gray line represents the school district average. So some neighborhoods have lower thriving rates than that, some have higher. And if you hover over each neighborhood, you can see a bit more information, the percent thriving, along with the number of children that represents. So this was all available before, but this is an exciting new feature. If you were really now keen to know more, I want to know more about Town Center, you can click on that, and now the whole dashboard has immediately responded to your interest and changed it up. So now you're looking at neighborhood level data. You can now look at this neighborhood's demographics, their indices, their dimensions, which we haven't even got to yet. But this is the lowest, this is the smallest granular look we can have. So neighborhood is the lowest aggregation that's offered, but really exciting. And I'm going to show another exciting feature, which is, so here you are in this neighborhood, but now I want to remind myself, what were the school district rates? You just click back and there you are into the school district. So now what I want to continue to do, I'm going to keep myself in grade 8. We've looked a little bit at intro, at demographic, at the indices, explore within, and now we get to the super exciting place. This is dimensions. This is where all the new measures have been included in the new dashboard. And there's a lot. It's a lot to take in at first. So just to point out some key features. First of all, I want to point out these 2 buttons at the top. If you're looking at something and you don't know what it means, press it. We'll tell you. And these are scattered throughout the dashboard, so you can click away and learn more. Download will allow you to download the exact image that you're looking at. So you can download whole modules, you can download specific charts. And then you can put them into a PowerPoint or a report or send them in an email. So take advantage of that feature. It's a great one. So we have these numbers here to help kind of navigate you. So you're starting with number 1. This is showing what dimensions are available. So we have dimensions, social and emotional development, physical health and well-being, connectedness, and use of out of school time. Then, because there's so much information collected, you can see which items are included in social and emotional development, but also we have sub-measures within this measure. So you can look at these other categories. And what I want to just show you is, let's look at citizenship and social responsibility, because Aoife just reported that. And I'll show you a fun feature of this dashboard. So whenever you see, so first of all, we're looking at the question, grade 8's Coquitlam. Children are asked whether they believe they can make a difference in the world. And Aoife showed that graph looking at what percentage agree a little or a lot. So here we're seeing across all these answer categories, but you can toggle things on and off. So I'm going to toggle it down so we just have those same 2 answers that Ava showed. So what percent agree at least a little or a lot that they can make a difference? And you see that downward trend that she mentioned. And here we are at the school district level, and you could even look at this at the neighborhood level. So a little snap, this is a water ski, but here's another little exciting one. So here we are in physical health and well-being. So you can look at the various items, including physical activity. So if I mentioned what percentage of grade 8 students are meeting that physical activity guideline of at least an hour a day, you can see for grade 8s, 30% were meeting that recommendation in Coquitlam this year. Some other features, there's a lot of different things you could look up. I'm going to hop right down to transportation, because we will have Lianne speak later to kind of a municipal perspective. So we know lots of school districts are thinking about this too, active transport. So here we're looking at the question, how do you usually get to school? How do you get home from school? And you can see all the different answers that are an option for a student to report on. So I'm going to stay in this all category. And then it's asking, we're seeing here, how are students getting to school? That's what this category is. And what do you notice? You notice that teal blue color, which is car. So lots of students in Coquitlam traveling to school by car. This lighter color here is walk. So watch what happens. Whenever you see a little arrow like this in the dashboard, it means there's more. So click down and find more. So let's see. So this is how they get to school. Keep it in your mind. And now how do they get from school? So it really balances out. So there's many more students walking home from school. So if they're walking home from school, good chance they could walk to school. So this is the kind of data that you might use to maybe inform some active transportation goals that you would have for the municipality or for the school district. Okay, last thing I'm going to show, even though there's gobs to show, here we are in out of school activity. You can look at organized activities, but you can drop down to see what else is available. Ava talked about screen time. So if you have a particular interest here, you can look there. Let's look at after school places, again, keeping with this community theme. So this is asking kids, what do you do after school or in your out of school time? What after school places, where do you go after school? So lots of options here. I want to look at stay at school. So here we are, reminder, we're in Coquitlam, we're in grade 8. Again, we have different answer options here. Never, 1 time a week, or 2 or more times. So let's click off never. They never stay at school. And let's look at this data. This feels exciting to me because this shows me that from the pandemic, kids weren't staying at school. They weren't even allowed to stay at school, but that's slowly been building back. Kids are hanging out at school after school. And that could be because there's activities to do or their friends are there. But it to me bodes well for socializing and getting back into the swing of things. And you can do that maybe for after school programs. So let's look at, again, I can switch around between my grades and my years. So let's look at the younger students who are more likely to be involved in an after school or out of school care program. Let's click off never. And you see something kind of similar, that the before COVID rates are higher than now, but there's a little bit of a bump between last year and this year, up this year with how many are saying they're in an after school program. So you can see there's like literally gobs of information to explore. I'm going to pause, or I'm actually going to bump right out. I know I've just whet your appetite. So now we're going to put the link in the chat. Don't all go and drop off yet, but you'll be able to explore all that you would like. And now what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about data in action and just thinking about helpful resources. We've talked about a lot of information, and you can see all the information that's available. So what are some good resources? best place to start, whether it's to learn about the MDI for the first time or find examples of how the data is used, is through Discover MDI, and we'll put that in the chat. And after looking at all the data yourself, we really encourage you to make space and time to explore data with others. And this really is an action in and of itself. It promotes a sense of a shared responsibility for children and families across systems and sectors. So if you're speaking to school administrators and community partners and health authority, government partners, hopefully you're those of you that can ask youth to reflect on the data. What do they see about it? What do they want to do about it? Get some parent and caregiver perspective as well. And on Discover MDI, there are specific resources for supporting that exploration by youth of the data. So some focus group and lesson plan ideas. But now we're going to turn it over to Lianne Carley. She is Senior Policy Lead, as Ava mentioned, with Vancouver Coastal Health in the Healthy Public Policy team, where she's worked for many years and has really been an outstanding partner to help and a leader at VCH and with community partners to move HELP's data into action. And what she's going to talk about today, she's going to showcase some new and exciting resources that she developed alongside BC Healthy Communities, aimed at local governments, and I think really anyone interested in child-friendly community development around how do we support children and youth mental well-being in that community context. So we're grateful to have you here, Lianne, and over to you.
Thanks. That dashboard's looking amazing. I'm very excited. It's a lot of work that you guys have put into that. Okay, so VCH, Vancouver Coastal Health, in collaboration with BC Health Communities, created some guides for local governments to promote the mental well-being of children and youth. And this is a super speedy overview of it. It's essentially 5 different guides. One is an introduction section, and then there's a section and a guide for each of these protective factors that we're honing in on: social connections and belonging, play, participation, and safety. We created them because, as you saw from the data, for decades, child and youth mental well-being has been getting worse. And then the pandemic exacerbated it. And the result really was an increased attention to this issue, public awareness raised, and then more research on this issue than we've seen in a lot of years. The pandemic also highlighted key ingredients that help to protect children and youth during the pandemic. So for example, those who spent more time outdoors fared better in mental well-being. It also showed the correlation between the weakening of protective factors and poor mental well-being in children and youth. So for example, those whose social connections weakened, reported lower levels of mental well-being. And many of these key ingredients and protective factors are influenced by the domains that are under the purview of local and regional governments. Now, we know no one agency is going to fix the national mental health crisis, and it truly is a national mental health crisis. And a whole of society approach is needed with upstream action. Local governments hold significant power, influence, and responsibility for the environments in which children and youth grow up and experience on a daily basis. Sometimes we tend to see them as in schools, and they're in parks, and they're in libraries, and they're not in the spaces in between or in the public realm. Many local governments are taking some action here. That, for example, they offer access to community centers, but the opportunity is to promote more positive change by increasing strategic intentionality and striving to push beyond status quo. That is where true change is going to occur. As a start, VCH created a 300-page draft report on the mental well-being of children and youth and how local governments influence it. That's a report that's way too long to be publicly released, so we created a 2-page infographic on how local governments influence child and youth mental well-being. This is online. You'll get this PowerPoint later, so it's just really to show you we condensed a lot of information into a 2-page infographic to speak to local governments, but it's not enough information. And so we partnered with BC Healthy Communities that does a lot of work, particularly through their Plan H initiative, on working with local governments to create healthy communities. So these guides now are based on the same 300-page draft report, but includes way more information, way more detail. It also pushes beyond the VCH Health Authority geographic boundaries, which is really important. The guides are meant to build awareness of how local governments impact the mental well-being of children and youth. Some local governments really understand this and others really don't. So it's really to strengthen that understanding of why it's important in the first place to improve child and youth mental well-being. The guides also are meant to provide examples in a very concrete way of what local governments are doing to improve the protective factors that promote child and youth mental well-being. And they're meant to strengthen commitment to children and youth, stimulate discussion, and hopefully, ultimately, to inspire action. I want to point out a few key points about these guides. One is that they were created with the input from local government staff. So I held 5 engagement sessions over the course of a year in order to gather information, gather the feedback as we created the main content that went into these guides based on local government needs and their preferred format. The guides stay within the realm of mental wellness, so they don't venture into mental health issues or mental illness. They focus on existing assets and levers that many local governments already have, and they focus on upstream action within local government scope. And they highlight how local governments benefit. The introduction guide has a section called Where to Start. So if there's no other thing that a local government does, here is where might want to start. And the first one might be articulating a commitment to children and youth. Then it has a section on existing levers that local governments have that can be used to influence child and youth mental well-being. So beyond the usual things like youth centers and libraries, we highlight things like planning and design, infrastructure like streets, and opportunities to participate. There's a section on how local governments benefit from strengthening child and youth mental well-being. And we try to link it to things that local governments are having to deal with on the ground these days, like crime rates, homelessness, graffiti, etc. There's a lot of research that shows the links between promoting these protective factors and addressing some of these issues. So for example, research shows the links between a strong sense of belonging among children and youth and lower rates of these problematic / antisocial behaviors. We also have a section on closing the gaps. It notes that some population groups experience lower rates of mental well-being and/or challenges with regards to the protective factors. And it provides some information on certain population groups. You saw with that MDI data, the difference between what females experience and what males experience, as well as what non-binary youth experience, but also goes into Indigenous identity, newcomers, children with disabilities, etc. And then there's a section on the importance of quality adults. This underscores the strong, positive impact of this on child and youth mental well-being, and provides some examples of adults in local government who young people interact with. So again, beyond the usual youth workers and librarians who are super important, there's also planners, engineers, elected officials. The protective factor guides, I want to underscore, are not meant to cover all of the protective factors of child and youth mental well-being. So for example, none of these guides talk about sleep or nutrition. And we know, and you saw with the MDI data, how important sleep is to mental well-being. Instead, these ones focus on factors that proved to be protective during the pandemic and/or that were impacted by the pandemic, and for which there's strong research evidence, and that might fall within the realm of environments that local governments influence. And they include 3 age cohorts, 0 to 5, 6 to 12, and 13 to 18. Each of these guides has a Where to Start section, so it gives a snapshot of ideas that local governments could do to protect that factor, that protective factor. There's a What section. This is a brief overview of what the protective factor is. So in very concrete terms, what are we talking about when we're talking about play? What are we talking about when we're talking about safety when it comes to children and youth and mental well-being? So for example, safety is a very diverse concept. It includes everything from neighborhood safety to racism to global threats and more. The Why section is all about the research link. So what's the research evidence on the impact of this protective factor on child and youth mental well-being? And then for the how section, it includes actions that local governments have taken to support the protective factor. It's not meant as a prescriptive or to provide the answer section, because unfortunately there is no one answer. We're dealing in human complexity here, so lots of different things are needed. So this section is really meant to stimulate thought and action. Actual actions need to fit the local context, work with local assets, and push beyond what is status quo for that local context. The actions that we provide are examples of what local governments from outside of BC have done to provide the protective factors. And this is because we're working within timelines and had to go with easily accessed and found information. So these are really strong examples, and they were easier to find outside of BC. They're diverse examples and information. It's really meant to illustrate the variety of ways that action can be taken, urban and rural examples, and ideas for different age cohorts. And these examples that we've chosen, for the most part, have a lot of substance behind them. So there's lots of information behind them, not necessarily the guide, but behind these ones that we've chosen. Because again, we were trying to keep these guides fairly brief. There's sometimes evaluations or research behind these things, and that the action has endured over time. These last 3 slides, I'm going to go into a little bit of a deep dive in a very summarized way in terms of what a how would look like with these guides. So in terms of participation guide, we do highlight that it involves thinking and feeling about meaningful contributions to society. And that the research showed that there's a lot of evidence on the positive effects of participation on child and youth well-being. But conversely, research also shows that poor quality and inauthentic opportunities for participation can have a negative impact, for example, on young people's sense of agency and autonomy. So an example of how, from the local government angle, would be that from the City of Hampton. They have a program called Youth Planners. It was established a long time ago, decades ago, and it involves 2 positions for high school students to work 15 hours a week for 2 years with their planning division, and they also liaise with the Hampton Youth Commission. And each municipal document has a section written by the youth planners and focused on young people's strategic issues. To me, that is we really mean it to providing meaningful engagement opportunities for young people. Other examples for the City of Hampton in terms of youth participation opportunities is that Youth Commission. So that's 20 to 30 high school students appointed by the city. They have a summer youth employment program. They have a program called Hopeful Hampton Ambassadors. That's for an opportunity for 16 to 19-year-olds to earn money, create events, and bring awareness to the impacts of youth violence. And they have a youth grant program for youth-led initiatives. And the fact that I could find all of this information easily also underscores the commitment of the City of Hampton for meaningful youth participation opportunities. In terms of the MDI, indicators that feed into the participation guide would be, I believe I can make the world, the difference in the world. I try to make the world a better place, optimism, empathy, pro-social behavior, and out-of-school activities. For the play guide, we'd really try to underscore that play includes a wide range of activities and that it can be guided, supervised, or it could be unstructured. And under the what section of this guide, we try to highlight the importance of nature and independent mobility as it intersects with play. And at the younger age groups, independent mobility is play. For the research, there's a lot of research on play in showing the strong links to brain development, stress relief, and physical activity. And in this section, we try to highlight the importance of unstructured play and risk in play to brain wiring and mental well-being. For an example of the how is the City of Dublin's play strategy, which is everywhere, any day you can play. It helps to realize the vision for Dublin as a child-friendly and playful city. It's a really extensive strategy. It's over 120 pages long, and it's based on evidence and underpinned by the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child's Article 31, which is a child's right to play. Key concepts within this strategy are play as a biological and psychological element of child development, a necessity to support their well-being. This is a strategy from a local government, and they're highlighting that. It encompasses the age ranges 0 to 18, and it provides a comprehensive understanding of what play is and how it occurs. So it's not narrowly defined as playgrounds, and that's pretty important. And it includes monitoring the overall performance of the City of Dublin in providing and supporting a broad range of opportunities of play for its youngest citizens. That's a direct quote out of this strategy. So example, doing that through play sufficiency assessments of the public realm. Indicators from the MDI that feed into the play guide are physical activity, 60 minutes per day, travel mode to school, out of school activities, and after school places. And then the final slide of this presentation, I don't go into one on safety just to save on time here, but we'll look at social connections and belonging guide. And what I underscore here is that it looks different, of course, depending on the age cohorts. And in the younger ages, of course, the important connection and attachment to the caregivers is key. And how that caregiver has social support and social networks is also going to be important for that child. And then as the child gets older, obviously their social environments expand to include peers, mentors, childcare providers, educators, and other members of the community. Lots of research on the relationships as a strong predictor of children's well-being throughout the life course. Lots of evidence on the impact on lifelong health, success in education, occupational attainment, and job performance, among other things. So my final example here is from the city of Bristol in the UK and their belonging strategy. Their vision is to be a city where all children and youth feel at home and feel that they belong. It intersects with other City of Bristol initiatives called Fostering Friendly Bristol, Thrive Bristol, and their Children's Charter. The strategy is overseen by the City of Bristol's Young People's Partnership Board, and a central function of this board is to ensure that the consideration for children and youth remains at the heart of the One City priorities and action. That's a key structural systemic piece that they put in place. The Bristol One City Plan has a document that outlines the goals and timelines between 2023 and 2050. So for example, under the children and young people section for 2023-2024, the goal is to make a real difference to the city's communal spaces and streets so that they are more welcoming and everyone feels safer. And it's monitored in terms of its progress and impact through the City of Bristol's One City Goals dashboard, which is searchable by children and youth. And the MDI indicators that the social connections and belonging guide connect to are connections to adults in the neighborhood, connection to peers, peer belonging, out of school activities, and after school places. Wrap that up there. Stop sharing my screen.
Wow. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lianne. Such great information. I'm sure our audience is seeing why we've asked you to be a guest speaker with us today, because it's fabulous. I love it. I love when you show these examples. There's tons, so many great inspiring examples of how we can make a difference for kids. And then it's not just on the backs of schools, because I think schools do carry a lot of this weight. So super interesting. And we're going to welcome back Aoife and just bring up some questions that we have. So I'm going to direct the first one at you, Lianne, because we had someone, you had mentioned, I think, early in your presentation about engagement sessions, 5 engagement sessions, and there was a question asking who facilitated those engagement sessions.
I did.
So, there we go.
And they were from local governments within the Vancouver Coastal Health Authority. And I tried to get a wide section, but of course, it's an opportunistic sample, right? So I don't think we pulled in any engineers, for example, but we did have planners, we had youth workers, we had, librarians and recreation. Is to get a sense of like, if we're providing this information, what is actually useful and in what form do you need it in? And as I worked through that main content, I wanted to check back with them. Here's where we're at now. What do you think? So it's a bit of a reference group.
Yes, great. And I think you're open to hearing from people who want to talk about what you put out there and want to explore alongside you, which is great.
Yeah.
I think we just got something in the chat, but I can't see it. Oh, someone praising you. Twice seen Lianne speak and always so amazing and inspiring. Yeah, agreed. Okay, so now I'm going to ask, I think I'll go back to something that was said, and I put it out to both of you, and it's not really one you can answer per se, but there was a comment about, we're looking at screen time, and the question was about, well, is there, or do we ask anything about the screen time requirements of school and in school and homework? I don't know if we have any comments about that, but I thought it was an important thing to just say out loud, right? We're tracking all the screen time. We're saying kids are on screen a lot, but we also know that there's a requirement kind of in school to be using screens, and then never mind when they come home being on screens. Any comments or more to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question, because we don't have a question currently on the MDI that asks about time in educational activities. I guess that's how we could be asking it. The way that our screen time questions are phrased is that they get at recreational screen time. So I think the way we can think about it is that on top of that, there will be educational screen time. So if we have an educational screen time, I think overall our screen time amount would continue to go up. I understand the question in a way. I think it also gets at this challenge that we're trying to limit screen time in so many ways. And at the same time, there are components of screen time which are required by school and in order to participate in the activities. And a lot of I know that some schools use math apps or reading apps and softwares that are, some of them, really well designed to support learning to read. And I think what we're focusing on the MDI, and also what we focused on when we looked at the trends in well-being, was the relationship between recreational screen time and thriving levels, and the idea of when kids are engaging in screen time more than the recommended time, what is it displacing?
Yes.
And we did see this continuous trend, that a little bit, just enough, we always call it the Goldilocks effect, the just right amount of screen time, even recreationally, seems fine and seems positively related actually to well-being. It's more the excessive amount of time, and that's where we're starting to be concerned about well-being in children.
And certainly we know the province has made a statement about trying to move school districts into maybe not having so much casual time with screens possible in school. So we'll see where that goes. Probably vary widely across the province. Okay, I'm going to ask another question here, and this one, Maddie did answer some of it, but I'll put it out. This is about non-binary and trans groups. So I think, Ava, to you, just about, do we have any concerns about students disclosing gender identities on the MDI? And Maddie made some comments in the question and answer, so people can read it, about small sample sizes and how we don't report that, etc. But the question was more about, is the comfort level to disclose changing over time, if we know anything from that in research, or even having from focus groups, or an interest moving forward with focus groups around that question, around comfort disclosing identity?
That's a good question. And so what we've seen on the MDI is that over the last few years, the percentage of children reporting identities that are outside of the binary are increasing. So it's still a very small number, but children are more and more comfortable to use this text box, it seems, and to also describe. We have lots of interesting descriptions in there, and just I sometimes have to go online and try to understand what it means, but there are great online communities that explain to you the nuanced differences between different gender identities, and also confirming that these are legitimate the responses that signal gender identity. So children are using these. They're finding more and more terminology. I think you will have some children who might not be comfortable to share, and those might be the ones who skip the question. So we do have some, not that many, but we have some kids who just choose not to respond to the gender question, and some of this might be related to just not feeling comfortable. But I do think, I also talking to district leaders recently, it seems like SOGI is very firmly integrated into most of the schools by now. And there are lots of conversations about gender identity, gender diversity. This is a part of all children's day-to-day life. And that's why I think I feel quite hopeful that children are feeling safer and more comfortable in expressing if their gender identity is not the one that that is within a majority perspective of gender.
Right. Thank you, Eva. Okay, skipping around, we got all kinds of topics coming up, but another one here is about time spent outdoors and in nature. Do we have an option on the MDI to reflect that around time spent outdoors and in nature?
We have time spent outdoors, specifically also in parks and hanging out with friends and playing. That's one of the questions we have on the MDI. I know that the YDI has a specific question on unstructured in their unstructured time section, and it is very specifically asking about time spent in nature. So that's something we have been looking at and considering whether that's something to maybe add to the MDI, which I think would potentially be very interesting. Yeah.
And Lianne, I don't know if you have a comment there, yeah, about.
Well, just so that the adolescent health survey, so that's only every 5 years, but they started asking a question, I think it was in 2018, around time in nature. Now, I don't think they asked specifically how much time, but rather whether or not the respondents feel like they get enough time in nature.
Mm-hmm.
And then also on the MDI, when kids are asked what they wish to be doing, physical activity and time outdoors is almost always, if not always, #1 in terms of the responses. That's what they would wish more for.
I feel like we need to make you a designated, like, what are those like degrees that you get, a designated helper sign that you can, that's right. Thank you for sharing that data.
I wouldn't mind an honorary doctorate.
Honorary, there we go. That's what I was looking for.
We'll work on that.
We'll work on it. Okay, a couple more questions and then I see we're getting closer to time, but do you have any suggestions in supporting schools to use MDI data and take action? And I know we mentioned in the session, there's lots, maybe we can just say there's so much information on Discover MDI you can look through. There's also quick sheets that both the MDI produces and the YDI. Those are like a 2-page summary. And I'm sort of thinking to bring you into this, Lianne, too, about how do you help people get quickly on board with what you're talking about. So these quick sheets are one of those ways. They give a little summary of like, why do we even ask these questions on the MDI? Why is it relevant to well-being? And then those quick sheets also have a couple of examples of evidence-based or evidence-informed approaches that you can take in school, in neighborhoods, and yeah, I think in the community context. So look to those. I don't know if we can get those links in the chat box, but we'll share them afterwards for sure. Any other comments about data in action? I mean, there's lots of information. I think, you know, Lianne's resources are fabulous examples of how you can take those, and you've highlighted specifically in the MDI, how might you track or think about the data or the actions that you're presenting from the various categories you mentioned. So there's lots of examples, and we can have a whole session just on that. Okay, one question here, and I'll read it and see if we can have, I'm not sure if I quite understand, but do these tools address means to address the impact of migration or immigration on children in these age groups, which we might anticipate may be an ongoing issue? The impacts of migration or immigration.
So I mean, I'm not exactly sure what was asked, but one thought is that while we don't measure specific immigration or migration related experiences on the MDI, some of the researchers at HELP and Anne Gadaman in particular, she uses data linkages in her research, and the MDI is included in the data linkages. And through that, she can really look at children who have a migration background, who've you can even see what countries children immigrated to Canada from, in what ways these experiences may be related to also experiences in their relationships with peers, adults at school, and so on. I think that's kind of the closest we can get to the migration-specific experiences.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. And okay. I see the question here about summertime and the MDI, and I think Maddie had responded to that or to a similar question earlier, that the MDI does follow overall the school year the school year experiences. So by the time kids complete the MDI, it's between January and March, and we don't have any summer specific experiences that we're measuring on the MDI.
Yes, great. Well, that brings us to the end of the questions we had asked via the Q&A. I think we would all encourage the audience to please feel free to reach out to us individually in any way to ask your questions if we didn't get to them, or you have burning ones you want to talk more individually with. There's one popping up at the last minute here. Okay, let's do it. One last one. How are we capturing data of the students who are missing from the survey, those out of school, those independent learning, those who are unable to attend? So that's a great question. Great question to end on. What about missing voices? Because there definitely are missing voices.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's something where we really need to think about, okay, what are some other ways to giving groups of children who are not represented in the MDI a voice? Some of these is, like, as mentioned here, children who are not attending school, or those who complete schooling in an alternative way, but also children whose parents choose not for their children to complete the MDI. Are there other ways to give children voices? Yeah, I can't think now of a survey that would be capturing their voices and sharing it more widely, but maybe thinking of those adults who work with these communities more closely, especially those who support independent learning or home learners, finding opportunities for them to really share the perspectives of those children through their own projects.
Yeah, and I guess I would say that point we make about just sharing these data and talking about them with other people is an action. So bringing in, as you say, voices of folks that work with the population that we may not see in the data, but they would have perspective on their experiences. This is why share the data, think about it, get all kinds of perspectives on it, because you think one group might have a this is because of this, but then you bring in another voice and there's a completely different perspective on why, and in turn, what should be done as a result. So that's a great one to end off on. Okay, I'm going to pull up our last couple of slides, just because we always have a last couple of slides. And this one is important because we'd love to have your feedback. What are you seeing? Are you seeing my slides? Yeah, great. Okay. So just encouraging our audience who is on with us now to please take a moment. You can use the QR code to answer our feedback survey. We'll also send it in a link following, but would really appreciate to hear from you. How is this useful to you? What more do you want to see? What might we do next? I can see that we may do something more with Lianne and outdoor play and Dr. Mariana Bersoni's work around getting kids outside. There's lots more to talk about. So please let us fill out this feedback. Tell us what you want to hear more about. And next one is, if you're not already connected to us, another QR code and we'll put it in the chat as well, but to sign up for our newsletter so you can find out what events are coming out when we're releasing new data or new dashboard information, so you can find out that way. And then just an opportunity for us to say thank you, thank you, thank you. So namely, thank you to Lianne for joining us as our special guest. Of course, to Dr. Ava Oberle for all of the expertise she shared, to all of the helpers and the school districts that partner with, helpers that work with us, and the school districts that partner with us to collect the data that we can share with you. And for all of you taking the time out of your maybe lunch hour to join us today. We're really happy to have you and happy to hear more from you in follow-up. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and have a good rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.